Okay, hi everyone. This is just a quick Spry play video for Friday, and we're going to just have a quick look at how I can generate some useful layers that show me where my different pits are. You can apply the same technique for strips or any other area that you can think of. And what we've created here is we've got a table plot which includes the names of the pits in the demo model. So I'm going to show you the process through for the dump side of it. And so the process is, there's a couple of steps involved. We need somewhere to store the polygon. So I'm just going to create a folder here called plotting, and we'll call this one like a dump polygon. So we're going to surround the entire dump. You don't need to know the dumps in this model to understand what's going to happen. If we have a look at where they are, there's various dumps that you're not necessarily going to know the name of, which is what this is for. So I'm going to head back to the destination table, and I'm going to go to my table plot setup. So I've created a field for the polygon itself, and then the next thing I'm going to do is go to table plots, and I'm going to right click in here and choose generate plotting polygons. And in this screen, the first thing I want to do is make sure that my grouping expression is set to whatever it is I want, like a unique polygon for each. So if I want a unique polygon for each dump, I make sure just dump is selected. If I want to make it for both strip and dump, I need to select strip. The input solids here are just going to be anything that I want to scan. The polygon Z level, you can leave this alone generally. We can use the table plot settings to actually move the Z up and down. And then where do we want to write it to? Now if you're in a particularly big model, you may want to change the setting of where the output goes to. So you may just want to apply it to the first node in each group or block. So I'm going to hit next. I'm going to get 5 different polygons, which is what I would expect from before, just the 5 different dumps. So those have been created. I'm now going to create a new table plot. I'm going to call this dump names. The same grouping expression as what was used before. If you don't use the same grouping expression, you're going to get a strange result. The solid field that we're going to use here is called dump polygon, and normally for this I'm going to choose outlines. I mentioned earlier about where the Z would sit. My model sits at about 150 RL. I think maybe at its highest it might get up to 200, 220, something like that. So I'm just going to set it to say 250, and I can always come back and change it. The value type for this, it doesn't really matter, but you get a slightly more consistent result if you use numeric, and then what we're going to do is put a get index in here. It just means that we can get a different color for each dump, and so get an index for the dump level. So for clarity, that means give me the index of, that'll be a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. It just gives me a different number for each different dump, which means when I go to create my colors, I can have different colors for each dump. And then the format expression is the trick here, in that rather than using the number, I just want to use the name of the dump. So text dump, get index dump. So I'm going to get different numbers. The numbers don't mean anything unless I color them differently. And then the format expression is for the name. So if I create a single entry in here, generate the layer, and then pop open my dump names, even though it was colored white, it actually comes out black. And I'm just going to get, and the text is too small, but I'm going to get an individual polygon for each. Now you may get some slightly strange results. This model here has a couple of records which are incorrectly named, so I'm going to show you how to get around that kind of thing. So if we have a look at the solids, there's actually just in this corner over here is actually some Bravo S11 that's just incorrectly named. For the purposes of making this work a little bit better, I'm just going to ignore strip 11, and I'm going to recreate the Bravo Adapit 2 polygon. So we're going to go back into the table plots setup. We'll go generate plotting polygons. This time I'm going to limit my range, and in particular I'm going to make sure that I only go up to and including strip 10 for my Bravo Adapit 2, and I'll recreate that polygon, regenerate my layer, and you'll see it's been collapsed in. Actually it's cleared out the others. because I'd set my output range to all as well, which is a little bit silly. So I'm just going to do an inverse instead. So I'm just not going to include strip 11 from Bravo out of pit 2. Try that again. Some troubleshooting. Regenerate the layer. There we go. So the other couple of things you want to muck around with here are generally it's handy to have things to be a slightly different color. So if we use the wizard, we know we've got 5 positions, so we can go from 0 to 4. The colors aren't really important here, and we're not actually going to use the legend, but I'm just going to apply a color palette here to give me a variety of colors. I'm going to set my legend to off. The colors themselves don't really have meaning. And I also want to make the text a little bit bigger. So the font height is what controls how big the text is. Make it 10 times bigger, we'll see what it looks like. A little bit too big. And then there's a handful of other things we can do as well, which can be useful. So in the actual setup for the table plot, and this time I'll just run it without closing the window anymore. So I might pull that size down to say 60. We might change some of the lighter colors, which are a little bit hard to visualize. Might just darken them up a little bit. The orange doesn't really suit the orange color of the... Okay. And a couple of other things you can do. So text align to view. So what this means is no matter where you have your view, it means that the text will always kind of look forward at you. So that can be handy if you're trying to understand where you're at. You don't necessarily have to have everything lined up. So that setting can be quite handy. I did say I wasn't going to close this again, but it's nice to have a look at that particular setting that way. And then the Z offset, so if it's a little bit too high up, you might want to pull it down a little bit. And then the rotation, so if you don't have text aligned to view, you might want to change that number. And then the Z offset and the font colors and everything else. The font colors will be overridden for the when you're using outlines, but if for some reason you wanted to use solid fill, then you might want to play around with, say, for example, the Z offset. So Z offset for something it's generally half your text size if you want it to make sure that it sits on top of the thing that you're looking at. But yeah, pretty much that's it. It's just a simple little trick that I'll use to try and make sure that I'm getting a quick view. You can always use the hovers, you can always use other things, but I find sometimes just the simplicity of being able to visualize this stuff quickly is quite helpful. So anyway, I hope that was helpful, and Happy New Year, and see you next week.